The wife, who seemed devoted and loving, was hiding a secret about her lover that ruined their world. She cheated on her husband, fulfilling her lover's every wish. But what happens when the deception is exposed and she is left alone, lost in her own lying games? This is a story of betrayal and consequences. James fell in love with his future wife as soon as he got a new job. He was 25 and Emily was 20. She was working part-time while studying at university. The girl didn't take her colleagues seriously. For a long time she refused him even an ordinary date. But later she gave up and did not regret it. James turned out to be a wonderful man with whom there was something to talk about. In addition, he was handsome and attracted the attention of the female colleagues. A year later, Emily found out she was pregnant, and later they had a beautiful baby girl whom her father adored. Neither of them noticed how 18 years flew by. Ever since Emily was a little girl, they had a friend, Vika, who had been friends since kindergarten. And they managed to carry this friendship through the years into adulthood. Vika had been divorced for a long time. She was raising her son Callie on her own. He had just recently returned from the army and decided to make up for lost time by attending university. James was used to his wife going out with a friend several times a week. Then they went to the gym together. Then to the movies. Then just sat at home and drank. When their relationship just started, still young James did not understand why his beloved did not devote all her free time to him. He resented Emily, quietly hated Vika. But over the years he got used to their relationship. Emily joked with her husband, saying that he was just jealous that he had never had such friends and never would. James understood that, to some extent, this was true. Their daughter had left to study in another city right after high school. She had always dreamed of getting out of her small town, and when the opportunity presented itself, she fulfilled that dream. As her daughter grew older, Emily had more time for herself. She always looked good, and James contributed to that in every way. He did not spare any money on his beloved. When the child became an adult, Emily started going to the gym for dancing and doing yoga. She visited beauty salons and spas more often than any other woman in her circle. The investment paid off handsomely. For her 40 years, Emily looked very attractive. It was this attractiveness that attracted the attention of Callie, Vicky's son. Emily came to visit them from work earlier than her friend and was greeted by a young man. They were drinking tea and suddenly Callie said, "You are very beautiful," a woman confused. It is one thing to hear such a thing from a husband or from men her own age, but another from a young man who knows a lot about youth and beauty. Emily was very pleased. "Thank you," she replied with a smile. "I remember when I was 14 years old. I like you very much. My first conscious love, you might say," the young man suddenly confessed. Goosebumps ran down Emily's back. Callie's confession made her feel uncomfortable. She felt as if she had become an unwitting witness to someone else's secret. She did not speak with him again, and she could not look him in the eye if she saw him again. She was embarrassed to admit even to herself that after that night, she constantly thought about Callie. She literally dreamed of the guy taking her with his strong hands and pressing his lips to hers. She went to see her friend less often. Emily began choosing times when Callie wasn't home. She was glad her friend didn't suspect anything, because she didn't want conflict with her. One day she did run into the young man, and he, after getting a moment when her mother had retired to the balcony for a smoke, asked Emily directly if everything was all right. "Are you avoiding me?" said Callie. They were standing so close that it took the woman's breath away. "No, you seem to think I just have a lot of work to do. I can't come to you so often anymore," she answered confusedly. Her lips stretched in an attempt to smile. Callie looked at her sternly with a kind of concern. It was obvious that the guy was nervous. The next moment made everything turn over in Emily's soul. There were butterflies in her stomach and her cheeks lit up with fire. Her friend's son kissed her, and she couldn't push him away. A week later, Callie called Emily and offered to come to him. His mother was out of town and he was home alone. Upon hearing this suggestion, the woman became angry, yelled at him, and hung up. For a long time she sat there, clutching the phone in her hands and breathing heavily. Did he really think she was going to drop everything and run to his bed? That day, Emily got off work early and an hour later was standing in front of Callie, who opened the door for her with a pleased look. Their meetings became a regular occurrence. Emily had a whole spectrum of feelings. She was worried about her relationship with her friend, which would definitely fall apart if she found out about it with Callie. She was ashamed of James, who naively thought she was being held up at work, when in fact she was basking in the strong arms of a young man, and she was searingly and passionately in love with her lover. Often they didn't get to see each other, and Emily tried to keep their dates in the afternoon on her lunch hour, so that James didn't suspect a thing. His wife tried her best to act as if nothing was going on. James, on the other hand, began to see that his wife was starting to look even better. Her eyes glittered and her manners changed. He admired Emily without knowing what these changes were connected with. Once lying in bed after another intimacy, Callie told his beloved, "Divorce your husband. Let's go somewhere together. I want to be with you." He was admiring Emily and she saw it. "Well, yes, and your mother will kill us." The woman laughed, "And we won't tell her." After dialogues like that, Emily always wanted to break up with Callie, never to see him again or remember what happened between them. She and James had been together for almost 20 years, and she couldn't imagine life without her husband. Despite her feelings for her husband's lover, Emily loved him too and couldn't give him up. But their secret union could not exist happily ever after. Once again, when Emily ran away from work to fall into the arms of her lover, Vika caught them in bed. From what she saw, the woman felt ill, and her son had to hurriedly call his mother an ambulance. Shocked, Vika kept repeating the same thing. "How could you do this?" She looked at her friend with sad eyes, while Emily cried and begged for forgiveness. Callie sat silently in the kitchen, trying not to show his face to the women. He heard his mother say that Emily had to tell James everything, or she would. And the mistress cried and begged her not to. The cheater had to confess. She did not want James to hear about it from a third party, and pulling together the strength, told him everything. He at first didn't believe it, thinking his wife was playing a practical joke on him. But when he saw the tears in her eyes, he understood everything. They decided to save their marriage, they are family, they have a daughter. But after a difficult year full of scandals and resentments, they divorced. Emily's soul missed her beloved, and James could not even bring himself to go to the same bed with his wife. The daughter accepted their divorce, but the relationship between her mother and her peer was not. The woman was left hoping that after a while the girl would change her mind and resume communication with her mother. Callie transferred to a university in another city, and she and Emily moved away from their acquaintances and angry tongues. In the shadow of forbidden passions and hidden desires, fate gently wove her formidable net, drawing her into the arms of a dark conspiracy. The wife, surrounded by glittering illusions of her perfect marriage, suddenly plunged into a dangerous game of fate and began to cheat on her husband. But what happens when the curtain rises and the illusions dissipate, leaving her alone, broken and betrayed? In the following stunning tale of betrayal and experience, she will find the strength to rise up, pick up the pieces of her shattered life, and be reborn in all her greatness. Life in the quiet little village is always monotonous. There are no bright impressions. Everything seems to go on as if on a rolling basis. The villagers got used to each other a long time ago and have been pairing off since school. There is not much of a choice. They get married, have children, spend their old age, and then marry their children again, and everything goes in a circle. There is no news either, unless someone arranges it for himself. And the main event in my remote village was the sensational news that they will build a new factory. There was a lot of gossip talk. Few people believed in construction, but one summer evening trucks with building materials rumbled past. Machinery rumbled and a construction crew came. It was that day that changed my life forever. We were used to living in the middle of nowhere, in silence and complete peace. My wife, with her emotional and hot-tempered nature, had reconciled herself to the fact that no bright impressions were forthcoming. I did everything a husband should do, earn money, and help in the household. In the village, I am a reliable, strong, and hard-working man. She, like a cheerful dragonfly, was not very fond of work, but dreaming was hers. Dreamed of a city, of impressions, travel, and that I was ideal. Even at the beginning of our married life, Annie tried to diversify our life. She was having fun. But I was tired at work and could not reciprocate the mutual merriment. I was afraid to go into the city in order not to get involved in some interesting story, and also in order to save the family budget. So our family evenings were peaceful and quiet. However, on a quiet summer evening was the beginning of construction, where I saw him. It was the construction foreman who won her heart. I worked from morning till night, was tired, and didn't notice how my spouse was distancing herself. Without realizing it herself, I started going out into the yard more often to do garden work. But that was just the reason. The construction crew, whose foreman was Nikita, was clearly visible from behind a low fence. In the daytime, I would put on a cheeky sundress and go out to the yard to sunbathe and look at Nikita. He couldn't help but notice it. The girl's passion could no longer sit inside. She needed to attract his attention, so she put on short shorts, a top made a mischievous ponytail on her head, took a hose, and began to water the flowers. The effect was not long in coming. Nikita immediately walked over to the fence and a conversation ensued. "Does the construction noise bother you?" "No, not at all." My wife became embarrassed. "I do not pay attention to him." Very sweet and even coquettishly smiled and made it clear that she was interested in him. It was from that day that something broke in my wife. Deep sighs of regret burst from her chest. I did not understand what was wrong with her. When I asked her questions, she would answer that everything was fine. When I came home from work, I would automatically receive a kiss on the cheek and go to dinner. She understood that she was attracted to Nikita, and she could not overcome this desire. A few days later, Nikita asked I to show her where the stores were. She offered to go with him by car. But of course, she was very afraid of the trip. She understood that it was only a pretext, because she saw in Nikita's eyes the same fire of passion that had ignited in herself. But I went. When she first drove outside the village, the foreman turned off the car, pulling into the shade of the trees. And there she was, already feeling his hot breath on her neck. And so shy, I became bold and passionate, falling into Nikita's arms. And so the 2 summer months passed. When I left for work, my wife would meet Nikita's gaze. And later, they would drive together to the woods, where they would give themselves over to love. She couldn't think about anything else. And I began to notice her coldness and aloofness. Already lying in the arms of this foreman, I wondered what to do about it now. How to tell me the truth. Nikita promised to take her to town. He described in every color how they would live together and get married. The summer flew by. Construction was coming to an end, and I was making plans to move to the city. She wanted to go somewhere where emotion and fun beckoned to her. And with Nikita by her side, it would be unspeakable happiness. The construction was finished, and it was time for the young slave to return to the city. And I was waiting for a chance to confess to me, but Nikita stopped her. "Sweetheart, I can't take you with me right away. I have some things to take care of, but I'll come and get you. But how can I be here without you? We'll keep in touch, and I'll be back very soon, and we'll leave together." And he left, and I stopped sleeping at night. She didn't want to eat anything, didn't want to see anyone, and I saw that and felt that I simply disgusted her. A week went by, but Nikita still didn't call. And then I began to notice that my wife was throwing up in the morning. And soon I saw a test in a garbage bag with 2 lines on it. I did not want to believe it, but I constantly cried and did not eat anything. Immediately, I decided to find out once and for all. And my wife confessed, told me in all the colors of his adultery, and even began to point out my shortcomings. I was furious and slapped in the face. It became clear that the child is not mine, but still did not want to believe in betrayal. But I was possessed by rage. I grabbed my wife and threw her out into the courtyard, threw a few things into her suitcase, followed her and closed the door. The grief-stricken girl walked down the street, and the fellow villagers looked after her. Many guessed about the young lady's violent shenanigans, but no one offered to help. Waiting for the bus, I went into town. She did not know Nikita's address, but she knew the name of a construction firm. She arrived in the city late at night and had to spend the night at the train station. In the morning, I went in search of her beloved. She found the firm fairly quickly. Nikita was there. He was surprised to see her, took her outside and led her away from the building. He was very angry. Why did you come here? I came to see you. You promised that we would. I'm married. I have a family and a life of my own. With you, I was only having fun. But we're having a baby. I don't want it. Get an abortion or tell your husband it's his baby. He kicked me out. He knows everything. I don't want to know anything. Bye. If you interfere in my family or seek a meeting, I'll go to the police. Nikita left, and I sat down on the bench and sobbed. She still had no idea what to do. She didn't know anyone in town, and no one wanted her. And in the village life had come to a standstill. Money was enough for a communal room. The next day, the girl went in search of a job. She found a job at a hairdresser's as a cleaner. She worked during the day, but at night, she wept on her pillow and thought of her bitter fate. Anything always wanted to get out into the city, but not under these circumstances, and not at this price. I received a letter from my ex-wife in which she told me everything, apologized, and asked me not to file for divorce. But my decision was unchanged. After the divorce, she never contacted me again. And how is her life now? I do not know. Yes, my wife, 42 female, and I, 48 male, were married for 14 years. We never had any children, but that's not to say we didn't try. She was a manager at Kmart and I worked in a shipping warehouse. It wasn't glamorous, but it felt like we belonged with each other and our work crew. We had a routine in friends like family that I wouldn't have traded for the world. We were always honest, talkative, attentive, and considerate of each other. Our sense of humor was pretty dark. We liked watching and reading things online that would make other people squeamish. We also thought it was super funny when we ripped on each other and our friends thought we were seriously fighting. People from our apartment building would take turns cooking on the grill for the rest of us for a giant cookout. One day, the grill was moved to a different spot and caught a tree on fire. It spread to roof of the building and down all in a matter of minutes. Thankfully, everyone survived, but my wife and I passed out and had to be rescued by a volunteer firefighter before the fire trucks even arrived. We were taken to the hospital for asphyxiation from smoke inhalation. I was discharged 2 weeks before my wife, because she wasn't able to cover her mouth and nose like I did while I searched for her. It's impossible to see in smoke like that, so I started choking before I found her. While my wife recovered, she was conscious, but she needed special attention and respiratory treatment. I noticed one doctor that seemed to care very deeply about my wife. He was handsome and charming, which irritated me. My wife smiled at him, and they looked into each other's eyes very intently when they mostly him spoke. When I started staying by my wife's side, the doctor told me he was the one to receive her that day in the ER, and he'd been looking after her ever since. I didn't know how to respond. I wanted my wife to get the care she needed, but I didn't like this guy. He seemed to think too highly of himself and think he could take my wife if he wanted to. When he helped her stand up, he put his arm around her waist and held her close. She took her time moving when he was like that. I was struggling with my thoughts at this point. She didn't really need help walking, did she? My wife could barely speak, but she seemed smitten with the doctor, and emotionally strained when she looked at me. She never said anything really alarming, but it was clear something had changed. We had a near-death experience, and that does change people, but I didn't want to believe my wife, and I wouldn't make it through this together unchanged. When it was time for her to be discharged, she hesitated to go home. She asked if she could stay in the hospital longer, which gave the doctor the opportunity to offer her follow-up visits at her home. I was very suspicious and didn't think it was all in my head anymore. I thought about objecting but decided not to. I imagined how bad and weird it would look for me to deny my wife doctor visits. Even if he was pushing boundaries, I'd look like the bad guy. I couldn't believe he so easily agreed to make house visits. This was something a person with much less qualifications could have done, so I was positive it was because he at least wanted to visit my wife, if not more. The very first doctor visit was at 9 a.m. on a Tuesday. Of course, I was at work. I texted my wife at 9:10 to ask if he was there, and how it was going. She didn't reply, so I started to wonder what was going on. I felt like a shell of a person walking around the warehouse. 2 hours later, I still heard nothing from her. Coworkers approached me, concerned for my well-being because I was pale and clammy. At 11:25, I was pulling into her driveway. I drove recklessly to get there as fast as I could after I got permission from my boss. I noticed his luxury vehicle, and that the front door was locked, which was unusual for when we had a visitor. As I walked up the stairs, I heard them. Our dresser was pinning the bedroom door open against the wall because privacy was never a concern of ours. When I got there, I just dropped to my knees. I had no control over my body. The doctor leaped up and scrambled to get his pants on, flushed and angry. My wife covered herself with blankets, yelling helplessly as I rose to my feet and started throwing punches. It was the loudest I heard her since before the fire, and it made my blood run cold. She wasn't the woman I married anymore. Something made her change and let this man screw up her emotions. After I got in a few punches in my adrenalized state, the doctor must have realized what a dire and unprofessional situation he was in, because he stumbled down the stairs, got to his car, and drove off. In the bedroom, my wife apologized profusely and pleaded for me to forgive her, but I just screamed no and called her names that accurately described what she did. Of course, when I said cheater, she tried to say I stopped them, so it didn't count. She failed to understand that trying to seduce him with her eyes and gestures in the hospital and making out with him in the nude still counted as cheating. At first, I was worried he was going to press charges against me, and it would be my word against his, but nothing happened for months. I tried to get the doctor fired, but it didn't work because nothing was captured on camera, and he hadn't told anyone he was making a house call. Plus, he had expensive lawyers that would pin all the blame on me for causing him injuries. My wife left pitiful voicemails on my phone, but when she realized I couldn't stand to look at her, she continued seeing the doctor, even before our divorce was final. I ended up kicking her out of the house, and a week later she posted that she was in a relationship with him. It made me sick. Life really seemed cruel, unfair, and without reason at this point. Thankfully, that's when it all started to turn around. She moved in with the doctor, who wasn't going to hand her money to help with the divorce aftermath. It didn't take long before AP realized what a mess she was and dumped her, kicking her to the curb when she had nothing else. She was so defeated, she didn't even try to get me to let her back in. Her sister let her move in, since she was exceptionally depressed after screwing up her whole life with me. My ex calls me occasionally, saying she misses me and would give anything in the world to have another chance at being my wife. She sort of blames the fire at our apartment for screwing up her head and making her think she felt things for the doctor when it was just survivor thankfulness. I didn't believe a word she said. For all I knew, she wouldn't be saying any of that to me if it weren't for AP leaving her. OP, I am so sorry your wife cheated on you with her doctor. It most likely was because her emotions of recovery influenced her to do something she hadn't done before. Emotions are not as big and powerful as what people think. With maturity, practice, and self-control, anyone can manage their emotions and do what's right. If denying the temptation bothers them that much, they should wait 72 hours after rejoining their spouse before deciding to talk to them about it. This conversation could end the relationship since there's temptation, but at least there's a chance some sense could be talked into the tempted one and the two of you could grow stronger. You did the right thing by separating from her after stopping them. That's the only way to get a clear head and realize you're going to be okay without that person in your life. It takes strength and courage to part from people that have hurt us, but it is better to stand on your own for a while than with a traitor. Thanks for sharing with us. Now let's move on to our next story for the day. At the time of this story, my wife was 26 and I was 25. We were getting along fine, married for 3 years, together for 6. Ironically, one of the things that attracted me to her the most was her maturity. She usually thought through any big life decisions very carefully, like what college she went to, haircuts she tried, and most importantly, when she wanted to have kids. Her parents raised her to think things through, but they were never very good with money. Her grandmother was the one to put her through college. So in her 3rd year of marriage, we had debt from my schooling and some of hers, and she still hadn't landed a job in her field. What she was working wasn't paying well at all, so a lot of the strain was on me. I could tell she felt bad, but I didn't know she was about to make a big decision without talking to me first. She decided to sell her car and met a potential buyer on a Monday while I was at work. He was very excited about it, but he couldn't drive it home until the weekend. So to reserve it, he paid her in full. Cash. She gave him a bill of sale, dated, signed, and notarized. However, she continued driving the car, and I didn't realize she'd sold it. She mentioned over dinner that she really loved her car, and then she broke down into tears. That's when she explained it all to me and added that she'd spent half of his cash on our bills and debt payments. I was pretty upset with her, and I told her she'd probably have to sell her car to him since we couldn't pay him back his money. Her face was deflated, but accepted facts. She screwed up by selling a car she loved and needed, but she had to follow through now. I was at work on Saturday when my wife said the buyer was coming to get the car. She didn't respond to me while he was there, so that made me worry. I checked the live feed of our security camera out front. I only saw a guy, crew cut, standing in the driveway with the cars, but I rewound it a little and saw that the buyer had arrived with a crew cut to help drive the cars home. When my wife talked to him, it seemed like she was giving him bad news. He waved his arms around and rubbed his head like she was stressing him out. Just when it looked like he was threatening to sue her, she got him to quiet down and lean close to her so she could whisper something. She didn't know the camera didn't record audio. Instantly, his face softened and he smiled. He looked so surprised and happy with whatever she said. He glanced at the camera as my wife took him by the hand and led him around to the back of the house where we didn't have cameras. Crew cut just waited awkwardly in the driveway for several minutes. I was already driving home, furious. By the time I got there, the men and their car were gone. My wife's car was still there. She greeted me warmly as if everything was fine until she saw the anger in my eyes. I shoved past her to the backyard where I searched our patio furniture for any signs of foul play. Stuff looked moved around, but I couldn't find anything. I looked across the yard and noticed that our neighbor had a backyard camera that covered our yard too. I knocked on their door and after hearing my story, they invited me in and recovered the footage for me. They watched the video with me the first time of my wife having sex with the guy on the patio, just like I pictured. I spent walk towards my wife, standing helplessly worried in the backyard. She knew what I was doing and that our marriage could be over. As soon as I started playing her the video, she dropped to her knees. She didn't want to see it and tried saying she was sorry over and over again, as if that would make it all go away. I told her I hated her for what she did to me. I started my life with her, accepting her past and life as my responsibility, and I managed to keep her safe and happy, only for her to end it all by sleeping with someone to pay off a debt. It was low and desperate, and she didn't need to do it. I told her to own up to her decision and follow through with selling the car. She went behind my back and lied more than once. My heart was broken. She told me she didn't see any other way out of it because she felt like she needed her car and his money. Then she kind of bragged by saying she offered him half his money back, but he said her skills paid him back in full. I packed my stuff while she cried and talked about how our bills were paid, so I should be happy and forget anything happened. I went to stay with my coworker. It was awkward and it made me feel lost. I had to find my packed toothbrush and toothpaste, and while digging through my bag of belongings, I found a pair of my wife's undies. It made me grieve for my loss. She fought me tooth and nail in court, even trying to claim that I was abusive and she was desperate to fall in love again. It was nothing like what you'd expect a woman to say to a judge. Since she couldn't prove anything and I had her cheating on film, she was ordered to leave the house. I sold it and started my life over in a different state, where I was offered twice my previous salary for doing the same amount of work. I know I lucked out and most infidelity victims aren't so lucky, but I wanted people to know that even when I felt that heart pang at my wife's clothing mixed with mine, I didn't run back to her. I deserved a chance at genuine love with someone else, and I actually found it in my new home state of Connecticut. What your wife did was extremely low, and it shows that she didn't think very highly of herself or the vows she took to remain loyal to you. It's hard to imagine why she didn't talk to you about selling her car in the first place, or at least think it through. You did the right thing by checking the camera and going home to figure out what was happening, and as hard as it was to leave her there, feeling so remorseful, it was the right thing for you. After a spouse has committed adultery, it's a good idea to take some days away from them without contact. They've already cheated. So keeping an eye on them is only going to stress you out and make you more desperate to save the relationship instead of realizing you're okay without someone who's willing to do this to you. She made a very, very poor decision that the relationship couldn't recover from all because she didn't talk to her spouse first about what she was thinking. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. If there is a story you would like to share with me about your own situation or someone else's, then please do not hesitate to contact. I'll tell you a pretty sad story that happened to me. I hope this never happens to anyone else, but maybe my story can help you if it does. My wife was invited to a company ball. It was really fancy, so ballroom attire was required. 2 weeks prior to the ball, she started to get really anxious about everything. She even asked me if I was sure I wanted to go. She said if I would rather stay home and relax, that would be fine. She usually begged me to go places with her, and if I insisted on staying home, that she gave me a list of chores to do. The fact that she offered me the idea of relaxation was weird. I told her I was going, and she could relax about it. When it got close to the day of the ball, my wife was using her phone excessively. She never told me why, and I didn't feel welcome to ask. We were in the car at one point, and her phone connected to the Bluetooth, and she freaked out. She started the power button a few times when the Bluetooth didn't disconnect. Her face turned really red, and she just started looking out the window. It was so worrisome. What was she so paranoid about me seeing? She went into the store and couldn't have been too paranoid, because her phone was laying on her seat. I decided to look through it. I didn't find anything interesting in the texts, so I checked her email, and an opened email said she had test results to see on her doctor's website. I looked, and it was a test result positive for an incurable STD. I could not believe what I was reading and the magnitude of what I just found. I wondered if she was planning to tell me anytime soon. We hadn't had sex in 3 months, the longest we ever went. These results were dated from 4 days ago. Did I have what she had? My mind was reeling when my wife started running back to the car with groceries. I thought I had enough time to check one more thing. I did a search in her apps for WhatsApp and boom, she had it. I opened it and saw a string of texts to a man named Michael. The only Michael I knew she was associated with was her boss. I locked her phone and put it on her seat. She got in the car and was relieved to see her phone. She said she wasn't sure if she dropped it and looked at me closely for a few seconds while she tried to figure out if I looked through it. I put on my best poker face and drove us home. We arrived at the ball before I had another chance to check her phone. I didn't sleep with her and I didn't ask her anything. I wanted to know when she was planning to tell me this terrible news. I already considered the possibility of her cheating on me because I didn't think I had the same thing she did. But I couldn't know for sure until I got tested. Why, unless she was cheating on me, would she hesitate to tell me this diagnosis? All of this was going through my head as we entered the ball. We had seats at a table, which is where my wife set down her little handheld purse. I thought about trying to sneak a peek at her phone. We were greeted by her boss personally. He kissed my wife's hand and told her he was so glad she was there. She introduced me to him unenthusiastically, and he greeted me with the same level of dismissal. He asked me if he could have the first dance with my lovely wife, and I felt like I didn't have a choice. Besides, I wanted to look at my wife's phone. While she danced with him, it looked like they were whispering to themselves. It was weird, and I had just about enough. I started looking through my wife's phone without any care if she saw me. I opened her WhatsApp and discovered that Michael confirmed precisely what time we would get here, and scrolling up just a bit more showed that they planned to sneak away as soon as I went to the bathroom or stepped outside for a smoke. I looked up at them in shock. They were at the bar getting drinks now. I looked through more of her messages with him talking about the sex they've had and how they want to have it again. My wife even mentioned her recent diagnosis to him, and he apologized for not telling her about it. She freaked out over text asking him how she was supposed to tell her husband she suddenly had an incurable STD after 7 years of marriage. He offered that perhaps she wouldn't ever need to tell me if she just left me for him. I took screenshots of it all and sent the collection to my phone. Then I used her phone to post it all on her social media platforms. She was friends with people all over this ballroom. I saw people looking at their phones gasping and then looking up to find my wife or the boss. I included a few messages of slander towards their coworkers and employees. I watched someone urgently alert the boss to a problem and he left the ballroom to talk about it. My wife was left alone, so she started walking back towards our table. She looked extremely uncomfortable, like she noticed something was wrong and people were staring at her. I stared at her too, fake smiling with my hands folded in front of me. She greeted me skeptically. I simply said, "I'm going to file for divorce because you are no longer my wife." Her jaw dropped and she sat next to me asking me what was going on. I handed her back her phone and told her to check what she posted a few minutes ago. She was really confused and looked at me like I wasn't making sense. When she opened her phone, I saw the moment of agony show up on her face. She looked at me with tears in her eyes, her hand covering her mouth. She realized her boss was most likely fired, which meant she would be fired. She realized everyone in the room was staring at her because they now knew, officially not speculating, that she was sleeping with the boss and both of them had an STD. How despicable and disgusting. She ugly cried while she grabbed her stuff and left the hotel, heading for my car. I followed her, slowly nodding in acknowledgement to every person that eyed me up. I had the keys in my pocket and I was not giving her a ride to my house. When I got to the car, she was standing there with her arms crossed. I asked her what she thought she was doing. She said she wanted to get in the car and go home. I asked her if she met her parents' house or her boss' house. She looked at me shocked and upset. She asked me not to do this and said I couldn't be serious. I said I would show her how serious I was, that she was never coming back to my house or getting in my car again. I unlocked my door, only got in and locked it again. She was screaming at me to let her in, but it quickly turned to desperate sobbing. A crowd gathered outside the hotel watching us by her car. They all knew she was the one sleeping with the boss. She was the one with the STD. She gave up on trying to get in the car with me and opted for sprinting into the woods lining the parking lot. I drove home. I didn't care what happened to her anymore. I scheduled a doctor's appointment the next day. It was 3 days later that I got back my test results, which thankfully said I was clean. I also heard my ex's boss was fired. As soon as her boss got an opportunity to sneak away from the intense scrutiny he packed his bags and left. On the way, he stopped to pick up my ex. They haven't returned to town since then. I put all my ex's belongings outside between 2 tarps. That was more consideration than she ever gave me. However, she never returned for it. My most helpful support through the breakup was my dog. Also heard my ex was dumped by Michael after 5 months. Wow. What a glamorous place to discover the disturbing secrets your wife hid from you. It was lucky that she put down her phone so you could expose their infidelity and shameful behavior to everyone they associated with. It's so lucky you didn't sleep with her before discovering the truth. It's also lucky you weren't tricked into raising an affair child. She behaved like a succubus, probably choosing to sleep with her boss because he was wealthy. A woman that does this can never be trusted. She doesn't have the right values in life and probably never will unless she's humbled by the challenges of life. It sounds like she definitely went through some hardships brought on by her actions. I wish you nothing but the best of luck in life, OP. Now let's get into today's second story. My girlfriend, 22, had a job babysitting for this one really nice family we both knew from church. They were wealthy, so spending time in their house wasn't really a chore. To make things even better, their younger kids were really well behaved and went to sleep easily. She had me, 25, come over a few times while she was babysitting and the kids were in bed. We never did the hokey pokey or anything, although it felt like we could have gotten away with it. This family had an older son named John. He was 18, but they didn't usually have him babysit because he was always up to something or at hockey practice. One time while she was babysitting, my girlfriend randomly stopped responding to my texts. I thought something was seriously wrong. She already told me the kids were asleep, but I guessed there was a small chance one of them woke up again. I waited an hour and didn't hear anything. I decided to drive over there to check it out. At first, nothing appeared to be wrong. No flashing police lights or anything scary like that. I walked up the path to the front door and noticed an odd movement through the window. I cupped my hands around my face to see into the living room through a tiny gap in the blinds. I was shocked to see John having sex with my girlfriend. I turned away and tried to open the front door, but it was locked. Just then, a car pulled into the driveway in a hurry. It barely stopped before the door opened and John's dad jumped out. I put my hands up instinctually and said, "I just got here." John's dad paid me no mind at all. He just rushed to the front door and unlocked it in a hurry. He barged in followed by John's mom asking what the hell they thought they were doing. My girlfriend screamed and John yelled. His dad told him to get out of the house. He was not allowed to have unprotected premarital sex in their home with his younger siblings asleep upstairs. He asked them how terrible it would have been if the kids came downstairs and found them having sex. He looked to my girlfriend, who had only managed to get her underwear back on, and told her she was supposed to be the responsible adult in this situation, and she failed miserably. It was then that my girlfriend noticed I was standing in the doorway. She burst into tears and put the rest of her clothes on. She apologized sincerely to John's dad, mom and me before she got in her car and left. I realized I had no place there now that my cheating girlfriend left the scene. Just as I was about to leave, John's mom followed me outside, closing the front door behind her to muffle the yelling between John and his dad. She apologized to me for what I was going through. She reminded me that the end of one relationship doesn't have to be the end of the world. I thanked her and asked how they knew what was happening at the house. She said they had a hidden camera in the living room that connected to their cell phones. They'd see me every time I was at their house, but since they knew I was a well-behaved man, they didn't mind me hanging out with my girlfriend. They actually felt their kids were safer when I was there too. I told my parents everything that happened. I lived on my own at this point, but I needed their support. They told me I didn't need to ever speak to my girlfriend again. She proved herself unfit to be a wife. Just then she called me. She told me she would never make this mistake again. I believed her, but that didn't mean I wanted her back. I asked her why she did it and what happened. She just told me that after John came home, he started talking with her, and after a while asked point blank if she wanted to have sex. She gave in, not really thinking too hard about it. It hurt to hear that. How could she just not think about it? She gave in to her primal instincts with little resistance, assuming she wouldn't get caught. It was so unfair to me, her loving boyfriend. I was loyal to her even when a woman from my job came on to me. Well, that phone call was all I needed to officially decide I wasn't going to stay with her anymore. I told her on the same phone call, "All right, well, it was nice knowing you, but our time together has come to an end. I wish you the best," and hung up. It wasn't very long until she tried to call me again several times, but I never answered. John's parents had told my ex's parents and the church that they caught her having sex in their house while she was supposed to be babysitting. I didn't keep up with my ex since, but heard she moved out of town. I am so sorry you went through the worry and panic and found your girlfriend cheating. It's a shame she didn't treat that family, you and herself, with more respect. It doesn't sound like she's mature enough for a serious relationship or job. You made the right decision to seek support and leave her. A good partner would never do anything to jeopardize their relationship, even if supposedly no one is watching. I wish you the best of luck going forward. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also comment below with your thoughts on what happened.